The Jeffrey Epstein case. Power, influence, and the limits of accountability. In the summer of 2019, a private jet touched down in New Jersey, carrying a man whose name had circulated quietly among the powerful for decades, Jeffrey Epstein. To some, he was a financier with unusual access. To others, he was a social connector, someone who seemed to know everyone who mattered. Photographs showed him beside presidents, beside royalty, beside billionaires, scientists, and cultural figures. For years, his wealth and influence placed him inside elite circles. But in July 2019, that image fractured. Federal prosecutors arrested Epstein and charged him with sex trafficking of minors and conspiracy. They alleged that he had operated a system that exploited underage girls, recruiting vulnerable victims and abusing them at his properties in New York and Florida. The charges were serious, and they were not new. More than a decade earlier, in 2005, law enforcement in Florida began investigating similar allegations. Young girls had reported inappropriate conduct. The investigation eventually led to a plea agreement in 2008. That agreement would later become one of the most criticized legal deals in recent history. Epstein pleaded guilty to state charges related to prostitution involving a minor. He served approximately 13 months in custody. He was granted work release privileges, and federal prosecutors declined to pursue broader charges at that time. Years later, many would question how such an agreement had been reached, and whether his financial resources and powerful connections played a role. The 2008 deal remained controversial long after it was signed, but for a time, the case faded from national attention. Until it didn't. Investigative reporting in the late 2010s renewed scrutiny of the earlier plea agreement. Public pressure intensified, and federal authorities reopened the case. By the time of his 2019 arrest, Epstein's name was no longer whispered. It dominated headlines across the world. This time, the charges were federal. This time, the potential penalties were far greater. And this time, many believed the full story might finally emerge in court. As Epstein awaited trial in a federal detention facility in New York, media coverage expanded. Questions swirled about the scope of the alleged network. Would other powerful individuals face scrutiny? Would courtroom testimony reveal deeper institutional failures? The anticipation of a public trial carried weight. It suggested accountability. It suggested transparency. But that expectation would never be fulfilled. On August 10, 2019, just weeks after his arrest, Jeffrey Epstein was found unresponsive in his jail cell. He was later pronounced dead. The New York City medical examiner ruled the cause of death a suicide by hanging. Yet almost immediately, controversy followed. Reports indicated that jail guards had failed to conduct required checks during the night. 2 security cameras near his cell were reportedly malfunctioning. Epstein had previously been placed on suicide watch after an earlier incident, but had been removed from that status prior to his death. Subsequent investigations confirmed significant procedural failures within the detention facility. 2 correctional officers were later charged with falsifying records related to their supervision duties. For many observers, the circumstances were deeply troubling, because with Epstein's death, the federal criminal case against him ended. There would be no trial, no cross-examination, no formal presentation of evidence in open court. For victims who had come forward, the abrupt end of proceedings meant that direct legal accountability would never occur. In the vacuum that followed, speculation spread rapidly online. Numerous theories emerged, fueled by Epstein's high-profile associations and the documented security lapses. However, official investigations concluded that the cause of death was suicide and did not establish evidence supporting alternative explanations. Still, public skepticism persisted, not necessarily because of proven contradictions, but because the situation involved extraordinary influence and undeniable institutional failure. Even without speculation, the established facts alone raised serious concerns. A wealthy financier accused of exploiting minors. A controversial plea agreement years earlier. A dramatic federal arrest. and a death in custody before trial. The story did not entirely end there. In July 2020, Ghislaine Maxwell, a longtime associate of Epstein, was arrested on federal charges including sex trafficking and conspiracy. Prosecutors alleged that she had helped recruit and groom underage girls. In December 2021, Maxwell was convicted on multiple counts. In 2022, she was sentenced to prison. Her conviction represented a significant legal development in the broader case. It demonstrated that the justice system continued to pursue related accountability even after Epstein's death. Yet the larger questions surrounding the case remained. How did a plea agreement in 2008 allow limited jail time despite serious allegations? What mechanisms exist to ensure equal treatment under the law, regardless of wealth or status? How should detention facilities safeguard high-profile inmates facing serious charges? And how can public trust be maintained when procedural failures intersect with powerful individuals? The Epstein case became more than a criminal investigation. It became a lens through which broader systemic issues were examined. It prompted discussions about prosecutorial discretion, about transparency in plea negotiations, about the treatment of victims in complex abuse cases, and about oversight within federal detention facilities. In democratic societies, institutions rely heavily on public confidence. When high-profile cases expose weaknesses, that confidence can erode quickly. The absence of a public trial left unanswered questions, not necessarily because evidence was hidden, but because the judicial process was interrupted before it could fully unfold. That interruption shaped the narrative as much as the allegations themselves. Years later, documentaries, books, and investigative reports continue to revisit the case. Not simply because of the individuals involved, but because of what the situation represented. The intersection of money and justice, the vulnerability of institutional systems, the fragility of public trust. The verified record of the Epstein case is already deeply serious without embellishment. Federal charges alleging exploitation of minors, a documented history of prior legal controversy, a death in custody accompanied by confirmed procedural failures, and a subsequent conviction of an associate connected to the same network. Taken together, these elements form one of the most scrutinized criminal cases of the 21st century. But perhaps its most lasting impact lies beyond the individual at its center. It serves as a reminder that accountability must be resilient, especially when it confronts power. That transparency matters most when influence is greatest, and that institutions are judged not only by their successes, but by how they respond to failure. The Jeffrey Epstein case remains a defining example of how law, privilege, and public trust can collide. And long after the headlines fade, the broader questions it raised continue to shape conversations about justice in modern society.